This is when I think she was about 50 years old, and that's why it's my favorite picture of her, because she lived 100 years, so I guess that kind of just averaged out of who she was. But her father's parents, and I'm going to try to stay close to my script because I could literally just go off all over the place and talk for hours on Mabel. I feel like I know her as a but her father's parents were very strong Quakers, and they were pioneers from Canada, came down in 1853, and her grandfather built this cottage in Clayton, Iowa that stands today. I've been there and seen it. And this is Mabel standing there in front of it in her elder years. And it's near the top of a long road that leads down to one of the leading best steamboat landings on the Mississippi River there. And notice the railroad tracks go right through there also, so that was another major means of transportation. In her formative years, her spiritual formation, she writes in a piece called her autobiography. She says, "We lived those years close to the heart of nature. We caught something of the joy of real living. The daily contact with the woods, the birds, the flowers, the streams, they added something to our lives that enriched and sweetened them for all time. During the cold winter days, I taught my first school, which was composed of the two younger children, and I read. I read till my head whirled and my eyes ached, till I cried from the sheer weariness and grief because I had to stop. The collection of books in our bookshelf were not the kind that especially of interest to children. Storybooks and books written for younger people were unknown delights at that time. The shelves were filled with biographies of Quaker preachers, histories, sermons, and volumes of verse. But words had a fascination for me," she says. "Before we left the country, I had read everything that I could find in the house except plain geometry and a part of the Old Testament." Mabel's mother and grandmother were active Methodists, and this faith, mixed with her paternal grandparents' strong Quaker background, no doubt had a great impact on Mabel's life and her worldview. Both of these movements, of course, as you know, arose in response to a hunger for a deeper, more serious walk with God, and they were obviously a disciplined people, socially active in standing up to justice, feeding the poor, offering medical assistance, and they supported women in leadership. We do not know to the degree or what specific manner Mabel's grandparents and her mother lived out their faith before her, but we do know that she had a strong faith and that she had a close relationship with them. Mabel is described throughout her lifetime as a highly disciplined woman and exhibited the characteristics of a devout Christian. She moved from, we don't know exactly when, but I found records in the courthouse that or at St. Luke's, that she joined St. Luke's Methodist Church in Dubuque when she was 11. So you see the Mississippi going up there the side of Iowa, born in Clayton, and that place is still there, and then moved to Dubuque when she was 11, and we're going to talk about Fayette later. But it was in this Methodist church there that she developed strong ties with this congregation, and she just held them so very close all through her lifetime. This was a lifeline for her and made a major impact on her, because there she observed other Christian women, dedicated, strong Christian women that were interacting with children and men, children and men as equals in the work of the kingdom. She was in Dubuque and graduated from the high school there in 1896, with honors, which was amazing because 1895 was a very, very difficult year for her. Her 5-year-old sister, Jane May, had suddenly come down with a cerebral disease and then died 2 weeks later. 2 months later, her mother died of tuberculosis. So we know that the time that they were grieving for her sister, her mother was very ill, coughing, pain, weight loss, difficulty breathing, and so forth. And on the day that her mother died, Mabel writes, "I'm tired tonight and life seems hard. Today they laid her away, the only one left for me to love and care for, Mother. The one most like God this side of heaven, the personification of purity and patience and love. They've laid her away and I'm alone." That's an important word in Mabel's life. We're going to see a thread. Alone. She says, alone. Oh, the loneliness, the dreariness, the bitterness of that word. Alone. And the shadows are creeping closer. Darker and darker grows that word, alone. The light has faded and she's out there in the cold ground, away from the touch of my hand, deaf to the sound of my voice. The darkness deepens, my heart swells, my head throbs. Oh, thou great helper, I cannot pray. I can only sob, Mother. And I want you to focus in on that word alone, because her feelings about being alone we're going to see them change throughout her life. We're going to see what she thinks about being alone at the end. But it's interesting too here, what's not said. She's feeling alone, but she had a father and 2 younger sisters. So, you know, her father is very much out of the picture all through her life. We don't know a great deal about her. And when I talked to Eunice, said she never remembers anything about her grandfather. So anyway, she moved to Clayton that next summer after all of this, because her grandmother died. And she went back to Clayton, to that little house, to take care of her grandfather for several years. And it was there that she and her best friend, her life friend, Josephine Lears, became teachers there at the little schoolhouse, earning $20 a month that they stashed away to be able to go to Upper Iowa University in Fayette, which they eventually did a few years down the line. And Fayette, again, was established as a Methodist school, liberal arts. It was established to serve both sexes, which was the common denominator of universities at that time. And she became involved with the SVM, the Student Volunteer Movement, just as ESJ had. And it was there, after complete surrender, she says, to the Lord Jesus Christ, that she conducted mission study classes and became an able leader there in the university in both the social, the literary, and the religious work of the university. She received her AB in 1903 and her master's in 1906. Of course, she was in India when she received her master's. But right after graduation in 1903, she became principal of the high school there in Fayette. And she was also a member of the Fayette Methodist Church. And it was at the Methodist Church then that she heard Dr. Mary Stone, who was with the Women's Foreign Mission Society, speak. And Dr. Mary Stone was talking about the need for teachers in India. So this is Mabel at that point in her life, and she applied to the Women's Foreign Missionary Society, and they said no candidate ever presented better testimonials or gave evidence of a clear call to this work. She sailed out of New York Harbor on November 12, 1904, with a reputation of being a successful teacher and fine linguist already. She studied Greek, Latin, German, Hindi, and Sanskrit. At 26, she was small and slight with great physical endurance. They said she had a sweetness of disposition, simplicity, and a strong reserve power that marked her every act. So that's my Mabel. In India, we're going to be talking about several different places in India. We're going to start out with Jabalpur. And when she was there, that's where she first went, and there was a devastating plague at that time. 50 or 60 were dying daily. And her first assignment was to take the orphanage cart and go up and down the streets and take the children off their dead mothers' bodies and bring them to the orphanage. Quite a first assignment, wouldn't you think? She then moved to Khandwa a short time later, and there she took charge of the educational work of 122 girls. And she was there in 1906, which coincided when the revival broke out, that coincided with the Great Welsh Revival. She says, I never was in a revival before that was not somehow, to some extent, worked up. This one was all prayed down. It was not announced or planned for. The dates were set, and it was just prayed for, and it came. From there, she went on loan to Lucknow. And we're going to be going on in our slides, but notice where Lucknow is, and Sitapur, just above, and of course Bombay over here. So she went to Lucknow on loan to the Labah School for girls. And this, at that time, the campus of Labah was the high school. It was a teacher training school that she was helping establish, and the women's college. And then later, in the 1920s, the women's college became the Isabel Thoburn College, this is a picture of it today. And it's known as a prestigious women's college, and she did serve on the Board of Governors there at one point. But it was there, the college, and this Methodist Church that you saw pictures of last night was where Stanley Jones was preaching at the English-speaking Methodist Church in Lucknow. And so, but Stanley also taught Bible classes at the Labah School, so their paths were going to cross several different ways. At the school and at the church, there were young women lots of young women at these schools. They were coming to Stanley's and bringing him baked goods and asking him to pray and to counsel them, and coming to his services, of course. And he says that on his application for the Methodist mission, he made his intentions concerning a marriage partner quite clear, however. He says, I contemplate marriage provided the proper person can be found. And yet I have not been able to satisfy myself that I have found one suitable to God and me, and adapted to do missionary work. This does not mean that I have gone with one young lady after another to try them, for I have never gone with anyone regularly for about 5 years. So Miss Heffer, who was the superintendent of the Jabalpur School, she later wrote a biography information about E. Stanley Jones and Mabel, and she says that his soul was aflame with a passion for souls, which we all know. Every Sunday for 3 years, he had one or more conversions. But there was another youth in Lucknow at this time doing missionary work, one who in her own right was to do a great work for the kingdom. And at this time, she was the organist at the Lucknow church. This fair lady played her way into the heart of Stanley Jones. One day, she was leaving church, and Stanley met her in the aisle, and after a few stuttering preliminaries, asked her to be his wife. This was the most serious proposal for her, because it was understood by both that neither was going to interfere with the work of the other. According to the ESJ researcher James Robinson, you may know him, he says Jones wasn't quite sure how to proceed with romance. He says Mabel had worked her way through college in the United States partially by writing short stories for publications. And in the summer of 1907, when he was preaching in West Virginia and trying to decide if he should accept the mission board's offer to go to India, Miss Nellie, his lifelong teacher friend, had sent him a poem entitled Rest a While Apart, and the author was Mabel Lossing. Little did he know. It's impossible to say for sure what attracted him to her. She was pleasant looking, but not stunning. Once they were firmly in love, he referred to her as the sweetest girl in the world. It seems likely that Jones was drawn to Mabel's competence, strength, and independence, qualities that he felt were missing in himself. For example, whereas he felt he was floundering in learning how to pastor the church and to speak the national language, Mabel seemed unintimidated by everything. And after their engagement, he wrote that Mabel fills up beautifully the lacks in my nature, which are many. So then after this, though, she was only there in his presence less than a year when she was called back to Jabalpur. And she'd only been on loan to ITC to start this teacher's training. But the government, that'd be the British government, they offered to build a normal school there and to give a good grant and a salary to a trained teacher and to recognize it as a model school for the province on the condition that Mabel Lossing be the one taking charge. So they had a long-distance courtship because after she went back to Jabalpur, then she went on furlough to the United States for a year. So their courtship became through letter writing. While she was on furlough, she applied with the Methodist Board of Missions, and they recognized her as a first-rate missionary and educator. The conference officials were considering Mabel to head up a bold new experiment. To that time in India, only men were allowed to teach boys in school, and it was thought that women wouldn't gain the respect in that male-dominated culture. But the Methodists and the government wanted to see if that pattern could be bucked, and they were thinking about putting Mabel in charge of such a school, which was in Sitapur, and which is what they did do. And she was going to prove to be a great pioneer in this movement. This is a picture of them shortly after their wedding, just days after their wedding. When she went back, he met her in Bombay, and she got back on Saturday morning, February 4th, 1911. And I found this precious letter that I'm going to share with you from a little lady who has Alzheimer's in Iowa that I interviewed. And Mabel became Iowa's Women's and entered their Women's Hall of Fame in 1963, I believe. And anyway, this lady had a file on Mabel because she's the one that promoted this. And of course, she didn't really know, but her husband gave me access to the file. And in that file was this letter to her from way back when. She said we had, I believe, I'm not sure, but I'm thinking that it was Josephine Lears that wrote it, but I'm not sure. She said we had fine invitations to a perfectly swell wedding sent out by the Fritchleys of Bombay. Mr. Jones yielded to Mr. F's importunity, and Mabel was quite helpless. She landed on Saturday morning, spent the day with WFMS Bungalow in company with a lot of our missionaries. I didn't get the history of Sunday, but the wedding took place on Monday evening in Bowen Church. Mr. F gave away the bride. Miss Ehrlicher was there. She was the only one from our conference present. The bridal pair traveled to Kandwa, where they stopped over a day and a night. They arrived here by the evening of the 8th, and we had the pleasure of visiting with them 2 nights and a day. It was a joy to see them together, and so natural. They were not a bit silly over each other, but yet beautifully happy. Mr. Jones Mr. Jones spent most of the day getting Mabel's goods in shape to ship, and we monopolized her in the meantime. She showed us all her pretty new clothes and told us about the folks at home and gave us news of our society and what they were planning to do for us. Mabel's wedding dress was some kind of a pretty cotton voile with delicate sprays and pink flowers, a ready-made garment she got in New York. She wore a large hat, very becoming instead of the veil so common here. We are rather surprised that Mr. Jones should choose anything so elaborate for her. But he loves pretty clothes as much as we mortal women do. We had a dinner party in their honor on Thursday night and invited the Hermans. We asked them both to wear their wedding finery, and we 3 dressed as prettily as we could in our out-of-date garments. And then we had a fire in the fireplace and enjoyed a happy evening together. The next morning, we all went with them to the station to see them safely on their 3rd stage of the journey. They were to spend the Sabbath in Lucknow with Mrs. Ingram and then go on to their own house in Sitapur today. Miss Ehrlicher is here for a few days, and she's been telling us more about the wedding as she was present. Mabel wept when she heard that Mr. Fritchley had taken charge of her wedding, and she threatened to run away from Bombay. But in the end, she yielded. I wonder if she'll give up most things here. I can hardly recognize her in her present state of mind. Well, this would not be the last time that Stanley let other people's plans for him take precedence over Mabel's wishes. And nor would it be the last time that Mabel would find herself helpless in the wake of his decisions. The fact that she cried and threatened to leave Bombay when the Mr. Fritchleys took over everything indicates her distress over several possible scenarios. Her husband-to-be let her down. She did not like being the center of a swell celebration. She's a very private lady. Her own father was her down the aisle. And/or this extremely capable administrator, Mabel, was not in control of her own wedding. Whatever the root cause, Mabel's reaction was dramatic. And at this time, Mabel was almost 33, and Stanley had just turned 27. So they're going to Sitapur, and these are some pictures. Don't mind that date. My camera didn't work right. This is in 2003. And this is the outside gate to what is now called the Mabel Jones Boys School. They're in Sitapur. And then this is the inside gate. And that's one of the boys. To the right there is where the boys sleep. And then this is the bungalow, which looks really big, but inside it's just that it's high because for the hot air to rise, and it's not really very spacious at all. I had the gracious Mrs. Benjamin at that time let me come in and look around. And these are some of the boys that were there in 2003. And this is across the courtyard looking at their that chapel, and that's inside the chapel. Mabel and Stanley were immediately forced to face what was the biggest challenge of their early marriage, their young marriage. They were assigned the complete reorganization of the boys' orphanage that numbered 45 boys at that time. Also, they were overseeing a school of 150 boys in the city, the Zanana and village work, and oversight of a district containing 1 million people. And this was in addition to Stanley's evangelistic efforts. So the job description would run anybody off. But added to that was the miserable shape of the unhealthy mud buildings, and they could see disaster brewing. Another unexpected burden was that the Joneses were forced to cut operating expenses their first year, and at the same time personally raise support for the 45 boys in the orphanage. Circumstances were mounting against them, and Stanley's original plan was to get his wife settled and spend half of the year helping her and the other half evangelism, a traveling evangelist. And while he was anxious to fulfill his own calling to evangelize, he held a deep appreciation for the work that Mabel had been called to do, and he was committed wholeheartedly to helping her get that boys' school on track there in Sitapur. And that was a part of his oversight that he was assigned by the Methodist Church. The Joneses did not make it through the remainder of that first year in Sitapur before the boys' mud dormitories collapsed. In August, the rains came down, and so did the roof. With buildings and only $88 in hand, the Joneses believed that the Lord was saying, arise and build, and they obeyed. And they never went further than what they had financial provision to do, but they got it done. And with all this time, Mabel was still able to make great progress with the reorganization of the school. And she began purposefully and quietly, and in short order, her experiment was declared a success. In August of 1913, Bishop Frank Warren sent out a letter concerning Mabel's educational work, stating the experiment has more than exceeded our highest expectations. We now consider the work has passed the experimental stage and has come to be a permanent and most important part of our whole educational process in northern India. Bishop W. Robinson sent out a similar letter. He said, our trained teachers get the boys through their courses in about half the time, and at the same time give them habits of study they did not acquire before. And this remarkable improvement, there's a remarkable improvement in morals and character. So here, this is inside the boys' dorm. So you notice their beds, and each one has a little trunk, and they put their shoes up on the shelf. And this is the Methodist Church in Sitapur. And this was, again, in 2003, but looking at it, I just don't think it looked a whole lot different back in 1911, 1912, and 1920s even, some of what was there. At this time also, that Mabel was establishing all this, she established a correspondence with Gandhi, and she stayed in correspondence with him over 20 years concerning things of discipline in schools. But the tension was building. The building projects that the Joneses had embarked in August of 1911 lasted 2.5 years. And by the end of that time, Mabel had become famous and highly respected for her educational pioneering success, and Stanley was driven to despair because he wasn't feeling his call to evangelism. So the year 1914 was a key year for them. Not only did they bring more pressure to bear upon the Joneses' marriage and mission, in January, the North India Conference, Bishop Warren persuaded the already close to the breaking point Stanley to take the position of district superintendent of Lucknow district. And he was to supervise 100 men, 100 Bible women, mission schools, struggling churches, and raise half the money needed to run the Lucknow district. That same year, Eunice was born, and this is Eunice and Mabel. World War I broke out, and Stanley suffered his breakdown with his physically his appendix ruptured, and they had to drain that, and 10 days later he had lockjaw, and they thought he was going to die for a good period of time. And then they had to wait till the following 6 months later for some healing to take place before they could take that out. So all this physical, but then, the emotional, the spiritual, just the whole weight of struggling. And this was a period that he was pretty much out of commission for about 3 years. Just pretty much not there. The Board of Global Missions forced them to go on a sabbatical in 1916. But even after that year on sabbatical, on the return trip in 1917, they stopped in the Philippines, and he started preaching at several universities 3 or 4 meetings a day, and his collapses, as he called them, came back. So they get back to India finally, and immediately he goes to the mountains for a month to help recuperate. He comes back down, but he's still having severe headaches and fatigues. He goes back to the mountains for another month, comes back down, and he's still not well. In the meantime, here's Mabel alone, continuing the ministry alone, trying to cover responsibilities for him. They have a 3-year-old little girl now, and all that's taking place with the boys' school and her own assignments. According to David Bundy, Mabel's importance to ESJ's ministry has been almost always underestimated. He says, except for her, ESJ probably would have been sent home as a missionary failure. He was ill at ease. Sometimes he didn't want to even be in India, not finding God's way. His wife had a more discerning evaluation, and she was an extraordinarily successful administrator. Therefore, the board allowed him to stick it out. In his own words, ESJ says, my wife calls me a chaste rabbit. But then he had his encounter with the Holy Spirit. And this is the Hindu-speaking Methodist Church in Lucknow where he was. And then inside that church, there's a little plaque there by that window that just speaks of that's where he gave his total surrender. And his things began to change then for him, but still, it took him a while to get back on his feet completely. Then, but Mabel went ahead and she opened the school in July that year with 80 boys on the roll call. And here's a picture of Mabel with a couple of her boys at that time. The inspectors of school who visited each class said, "I know of no school in North India as well taught or where the boys are doing as well." She says, "I was struck by the quiet which reigned throughout the school. Each child was busily engaged in his work, which he seemed to be fully interested in. The atmosphere was totally different to that of the usual school. The children appeared keen and anxious to learn, and it was a pleasure to see them work. The interest of the children is maintained so that instead of drudgery, their lessons are a pleasure to them." In 1919, ESJ was back on his feet, and he began touring with Sherwood Eddy 6 months at a time, and they would go out in different parts of India. So he'd be gone for 6 months, but then he would be home for 6 months. But gradually through the years, that time away began to build and get further into other parts of the world. In 1921, there was a major black cholera outbreak, and it took the lives of about 40 of their boys. And it was a great shock for Mabel to see these boys. They were literally in a row, dying before her eyes. And she carried the added burden of having to make the decisions of which ones were going to live, since only one could be treated at a time. Well, this was a tremendous burden on her, and she did have a nervous collapse, the doctor said, and ordered her to the mountains for complete rest and freedom from the anxiety for a month. And she writes that, "I'm planning to go down the 1st of September and gather together the scattered remnants of my flock and begin again. Mr. Jones has returned to his evangelistic work and does not expect to be home until the middle of October." Letter writing was a major part of Mabel's mission. It was her means of raising support for the boys. And she supported and cared for the education of over 1,000 boys in her lifespan. Not only did she have to translate the boys' letters in her writing to their patrons, but the patrons to the boys. And mind you, some of these were written in Hindi and some of them in Urdu. She also corresponded with Gandhi for those 20 years. She wrote for American magazines such as Harper's Bazaar and Atlantic Monthly under a pen name. And Eunice saw her getting a check one day in the mail and asked her about it, and she told her she had written some articles, and Eunice asked for what was her pen name, and she said that, "I'll take that secret to my grave," and she did. And try as I might, Howard Snyder helped me try to find out what that pen name, we couldn't figure it out. In a newsletter written in October of 1922, she says, "On referring to my death pad, I find that since January 1922, this was 9 months ago, since then, I have written 2,198 letters, and dear Lord knows how many postcards. And only 1 letter a month has gone to my dear folks at home to be passed around. Allowing 20 minutes to a letter, I've had to spend 733 hours, or about 60 days and 12 hours of each day at a desk work. Every patron of every boy wants to have remittance for his support acknowledged, and some patrons write 3 or 4 times a year. Dozens of friends and missionary workers want material for missionary talks on every subject that India has, from education, mass movement, children, and theology. Parents and relatives of the boys must hear how they're getting along. Others write for information concerning the school or apply for work or want help or spiritual or material. I'm also the secretary of the Board of Education and chairman of the building committee, and this requires dozens of letters a year. Besides, there are monthly reports to the government, answers to communication from the Board of Missions and the municipality, etc., etc., etc. That same month, she wrote, "We have had a terrifying rain. Day and night for weeks, a little creek about a quarter of a mile from our bungalow began to rise. It kept rising. Almost 2 feet of water flowed over our floors. So we moved into the schoolhouse, but that soon flooded too. So we moved again, and this time to Mr. Hansen's house. I had just gotten the place cleaned up and was thinking of moving back when a second flood came. We waited for the place to dry up, and about 7 weeks from that time, we moved out and moved back again. We had just settled in when there was a cloudburst of rain, and the water rose 5 feet over the floors of the bungalow and 3 feet over the school. We did not have time to save anything. The boys and the teachers had to be rescued by Mr. Hansen and other Christian men and a squad of police through water neck deep. All my supplies for grain for that year of water were soaked and ruined. All the medicine, the school books, the supplies of every kind, the furniture. We have been drying out books and papers and clothes and bedding in both bungalow and school all week, and sometimes I feel absolutely dismayed at our terrible loss. But God has provided in the past, and He will surely again. Perhaps this is just to test our faith." When Mabel was interviewed at her 100th birthday, she elaborated on this ordeal of this flood and ruining their year's supply of rice. She says the rice had been submerged for several days, and as the water subsided, The combination of the heat and the moisture cooked the rice. The pressure that this phenomena was creating almost threatened to push the brick storage room off its foundation. She turned this personal disaster around and made it into a blessing for hundreds of nearby villagers who were starving. She sent word that she had cooked rice for them. And she invited them to bring their bowls, their buckets, whatever vessels they could find, and come and get it. And there were long lines of people who showed up for a shovelful of this precious steaming commodity. In May 1928, it was another memorable month in Mabel's calendar. It was 110 in the shade. She had a fever, acute inflammation of the throat, and was fighting for her own breath. She was sent to the mountains for an operation. At this time, at the same time, ESJ was being elected bishop. She says, when the Secretary General of the conference cabled me during my illness that Mr. Jones had been elected bishop, I could only pull a sheet over my head and indulge in a very feminine cry. But after a bit, there came a peace and a feeling that somehow things would turn out all right. I could not understand it for all my praying that there had been the most definite conviction that my husband's work was not in the bishopric. Well, she was quite relieved when Stanley wired her the next day to say that he'd resigned. I knew that God had had his way. We will remain in Sitapur. I will continue the schoolwork, and Mr. Jones will remain free to the work which God, not man, has called him. We have much to be thankful for. We learned long ago that there's only one path to peace, and it's to follow his leading without question. I've enclosed a typical day. She says, in response to being asked in a letter what did she do all day, Mabel provided an account of that particular day that she was asked, which she says is rather typical. This is typical. And we're going to start hour by hour just to tell you, and I'll just kind of zip through this. 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. Awoke on the roof, looked up to the sky, and asked the Lord for help and guidance for the day. Had my bath and a cup of tea and a slice of toast and read a little from the Word as I ate. Made some boric lotion for a village woman who brought me her baby with sore eyes. Showed her how to use it. Took some onion seed to the garden and told the man in charge where to plant it. 6 a.m. Took prayers with the boys. Inspected the boarding house. Wrote an order for rice and salt and sent a man to the grain merchant with it. Found 2 boys in the sick room and investigated the cause and gave them a dose of castor oil. Went into the rooms to see who was absent and why. 7 a.m. Returned to the bungalow as a health officer was waiting to see me and wanted to see if we wanted cholera inoculations. Mail came and I answered 2 business letters. A village man came. My baby has a fever for 5 days. What shall we do? The clerk came in asking, will you please take these fees from my day pupils and sign the receipts? 8 a.m. A woman who was baptized recently threw her arms around my feet and begged me to let her come to the school long enough to learn to read. A Mohammedan official calls and asks if I can have anything good to read as the Imitation of Christ, which he just finished. 9 a.m. Investigated a bad odor from the school drain. Took a sick woman to the hospital. Started to write out a new timetable for the school as we will soon change from morning school to day school. Matron came with complaints against the teacher. 10 a.m. Took the carburetor off the car and cleaned it. 11 a.m. An English lady who was in great trouble called for sympathy and advice. Noon, hot and tired, laid down. Got up 3 times and stayed up. The cook wanted money for the butter, the sweeper wanted a new broom, and the mailman brought a COD parcel. 1 p.m. A note from the doctor said that he would examine all the boys at 4. A teacher reports that the chalk's all gone. A father who wants to put his boy in school but fears Christian influence came to talk it over. 2 p.m. The pastor came to ask about some affairs connected with the church. A Hindu called to borrow a book. He's a well-educated man and getting interested in Christianity. He said, after I read the gospel a while, I want to go out and help people. I want to tell them about this good God. 3 p.m. Cut out a dozen pair of pajamas and sent them to class 4 for sewing period. Had lunch. 4 p.m. An Indian doctor came and we went over the physical condition of each boy, found 1 case of itch and various other minor ailments, wrote out his recommendations and ordered medicine. 5 p.m. The Boy Scout commissioner called to see when I would have time to attend the meeting of an executive committee. He said the boys from the mission school were the very brightest of all the boys who were enrolled as scouts. He said, what does your religion do to the boys? They have no business being so superior considering the fact that they are from our lowest classes. An Indian official called. He said, I feel very discouraged over my country. Things change so slowly. Discovered an Indian holy man going into the hostel. Ran after him, got him out, and headed him for the gate. He was dressed in a patch with a cloth about body was smeared with ashes. 6 p.m., a boy was brought to me for discipline for swimming in the river without permission. A man came to borrow 30 cents, a woman to beg for work. Grain merchants delivered rice and wants his pay. I would make out his bill and get a signature and file the voucher. 7 p.m., an early dinner because I am alone. And I want to get to that pile of unanswered letters on my desk and send a note to that little daughter away in boarding school. And now I soon shall climb the stairs and look up at the stars and commit my day to him. Of course, I have not got down everything that happened today, but it's rather a brief outline of the day that's not unusual. And now my evening is gone. As I fold these letters and put them into the envelopes, it will be with a little prayer for each individual to whom they go. Good job, I'm impressed with Mabel. So this is a typical routine for Mabel. You know, people lined up at her door for help and for advice, and from the lowly to the officials, the English, the Hindus, the Mohammedans, the men, the women, the boys, the girls, those physically hungry and hurting, and those emotionally and spiritually hungry and hurting as well. They all came to Mabel. She was known for her listening heart, her wise counsel, and her faith in God. And then outreach. Not only did they come to her, she went to them, and she went to them in the form of service. She was a treasurer of the Boy Scouts Executive Committee in the Sitapur district, a member of the North Indian School Board, a member of the Board of Governors for the Isabel Thoburn College, a member of the North Indian Women's Property Committee and the All Indian Women's Conference, which was made up of severally high-educated Hindu and Mohammedan women. These women who started to raise the status of Indian women were non-Christians. They did not invite many American women to join them, but they trusted Mabel completely. The way she went about her work, she did not alienate people. She did not demand her own way or force her ideas. Mabel also served on the Municipal Council of Sitapur district for 20 years with 10 Hindu men and 10 Muslim men. This was an elected position, which speaks highly of her, how she was esteemed. She earned their trust through the years, reaching out and living the Christ-centered life before them. Early in her mission, she became acquainted with the merchants with whom she did business, and they knew that they could not bribe her, and they tried many times. So this made a big difference in how they trusted her. Mabel writes in her 1930 newsletter that she recently lunched with His Excellency Sir Malcolm Haley when he spent a day in Sitapur, and that evening she enjoyed a garden party in the Raja district. She says, as I was chatting with various Indian friends, a Mohammedan official to whom I'd given a copy of The Life of Christ came to thank me. He said, I've almost finished the book, and I must say that I'm sorry and disappointed that I find nothing in it of which I disapprove. She used literature and music and opened the way to conversation with Christ. She had a record, oh, that I might know where I might find him, and that she would share that whenever seekers came to her. And after listening to it, she found that it was the cry of many a heart, the English as well as the Indian. She was well versed in Urdu and Hindi. She read the Bhagavad Gita in both English and Hindi, and she knew the Quran well. And because of this, the learned people of Sitapur would come and talk with her, and she would engage them in conversation. And she had books lying around like the keys to the kingdom and loaned them to whosoever will. She knew that she was not an evangelical missionary in the typical sense of the word, but she understood that she was not called to that. And there were many times when she was unsafe. She lived through many life-threatening situations with snakes and so on. But this one time she was alone in the car and gone to the bazaar to purchase some supplies, and suddenly her crowd was surrounded by a multitude of people shouting Mahatma Ghandi ki jai, and victory to Mahatma Ghandi, and it was a slogan for independence. And she looked around for someone that she knew in the crowd to help her out, but mostly the people from out of town. And they began rocking her car and shouting this slogan. And she just quickly used the Claxton horn on the car to keep time with the rhythm of their chant. And it was a loud, hoarse rhythm to that car chant, and it attracted their attention. And they got amused by it. And finally someone said, even a foreign car is for independence, but it has a cold. And just then one of the merchants that knew her pushed through the crowd and climbed up on the car and shouted that she was an American missionary, not English. Pardon me. And they had a good humor and let her pass by because of her quick thinking. But she lived for others. She says, I have never liked having anything to do with medicine or disease, but when folks walk for miles and help and are likely to die without it, what can you do? Her only training was from a medical friend of hers who gave her some ideas and some medical books. When necessary, she could write a note to a doctor in the one hospital nearby, and send some people. On an extended furlough in 1933, she averaged 40 to 50 letters a day without secretarial help. She had speaking invitations that she'd spent most of her time turning down. She spoke to crowds of thousands when she was here, and very much in demand. In her 1937 letter, she responded to some of her friends' inquiries that she said that you say that you're glad that I'm having a long vacation. I wonder a bit at the word vacation. I've spoken over 1,000 times in most of the 35 states east of the Colorado and averaged 17.5 letters a day, and that doesn't include personal notes. But always my heart is a burden on my heart for that which I dare not escape, a burden of prayer and faith and responsibility. And in 1940, Eunice was married, and this is a picture of their wedding. The next day, ESJ left to come here to the States for a year's tour. And at the end of that tour is when the Lord told him to stay, and the war broke out, and they wouldn't let him back into India because he had spoken out for independence. And so he was not back for 6 years. So they just didn't see each other for 6 years. And in Christmas of 1944, 4 years later, we find Mabel is alone. Never before she'd been alone on Christmas Eve. And as she sat by the fire, it was hard not to fall into self-pity. But Christmas Day was another story. She had no time to feel lonely. And she goes over, she dresses and goes to the boys. Boys are already cooking their breakfast. The ones that are true orphans didn't have anybody to go home to. She joined them with a plate of curry and whole wheat pancake, and then a happy surprise, an armful of mail arrived from the U.S. And so what a lovely Christmas gift, she says, but no time to read it that day. And she said different ones came to offer their greetings, some with gifts, some expecting for gifts. And they gathered later on the playground and enjoyed being together, singing and playing games until dark. By 7 o'clock, Mabel was at last ready to eat her vegetable soup and banana, and then settle down for a lovely evening of reading her mail, some of which was dated back to September. During this time period, several of Mabel's boys were sent back from the prison camps from Burma and told her of the atrocities that took place at the hands of the Japanese. And one of her boys told her, "Only faith in God kept us from going mad." 12 of us met every night for prayer, and we had no Bibles. We repeated the verses that we learned in school from memory. Someone asked Mabel, "How could you stand being responsible for all these boys?" "I suppose," she says, "I could not stand it were it not for your prayers and the certainty that this is the work that God wants done and that He's helping me in the doing of it." She went back to the States in 1946 for the last time, and she was continuing to be a missionary until 1954, but she was back in the States for that. That happened to be just when ESJ just got back to India in 1946, so he was just back a couple months. Of course, he was only there a couple weeks with her and then off on another tour in India, but she came back later in the year. In 1949, she was writing as many as 50 to 80 letters a day. As many as 50 or 80 letters a day were coming in. And according to the Des Moines Register, Mabel approximately 18,624 letters in 1948. Keeping those boys in school, over 1,000 in her lifetime. And then this is a picture of them in, I think, around the 50s in front of the little house in Clayton. And this one, I think, is in the 60s. Again, they retired officially in 1954. And then this is Mount Olivet Cemetery in Baltimore, Maryland, where both their ashes are buried. And they're next to each other. They're the long, flat one on the ground is ESJ's. And then the one standing up, I have a closer shot there, Mabel Lossing, April 3rd. 1878 to June 23rd, 1978, says missionary, educator, humanitarian friend. And then I will leave you with this picture. This picture, even the original of it, is very blurred like that. And it just tugs at my heart every time I look at it, because to me, it's such a picture, unspoken words of who Mabel is. Alone at the foot of the cross. And just that peaceful, trusting faithfulness of God to her and her to God. And she wrote toward the very end of her days, "The delight of being alone." And she starts out by quoting Psalm 102:7, "I watch and am as a sparrow alone on the housetop." And she says, "Perhaps the sparrow, or at least the psalmist, was unhappily alone, but not I." Even in this secluded village, it's difficult to be alone long enough to get any task finished that calls for quiet application. How I delight in a rainy day, a day in which I can reasonably be sure that for that day at least I'll be alone. This door is always open, always will be, to friends, to those who would possibly classify themselves as friends. I'd miss them if they didn't come, and I'd wonder what I'd lacked or what I'd done if people stayed away. But a day to myself is cherished more than gold. This time to discover lost values, to enjoy one's own company. If you can't endure this, it's time to wonder why. Mabel Jones. Thank you.